So here we are, ladies and gentlemen, in late September, a month ago to Halloween, and today we're really going to do it a little bit early. The granddaddy of the Hammer films, the movie that changed the world and changed the Hammer influence on the English moviegoers. The Curse of Frankenstein. Now, The Curse of Frankenstein, the legendary movie, it came out in 1957 by Hammer, loosely based on the 1818 novel Frankenstein or the modern Prometheus by Mary Shelley. It was Hammer's first color horror film and the first of their Frankenstein series. Its worldwide success led to several sequels. It was also followed by new versions of Dracula and the Mummy in 58 and 59, establishing Hammer horror as a distinctive brand of Gothic cinema. The film was directed by Terence Fisher and stars the great Peter Cushing as Victor Frankenstein and the incomparable Christopher Lee as the Creature, with Hazel Court and Robert Urquhart. Professor Patricia McCormick called it the first really gory horror film showing blood and guts in color. Produced by Anthony Hines, of course, directed by Terence Fisher, screenplay by the great Jimmy Sangster, cinematography by Jack Asher, edited by James Needs, music by the incomparable James Bernard, color process was Eastman Color, distributed by Warner Brothers, came out the 2nd of May in 57 in London, and 20th May 57 the rest of the UK. 83 minutes. Get this, ladies and gentlemen. Allegedly, it only cost £65,000 or 270,000 American. Made $8 million at the box office in his numerous releases, with almost 730,000 admissions in France alone. In this one, in 19th century Switzerland, Baron Frankenstein is awaiting execution for the murder of his maid Justine. He tells the story of his life to a visiting priest. At age 15, the death of Victor's mother leaves him sole control of the Frankenstein estate. He agrees to continue to pay a monthly allowance to his impoverished Aunt Sophia and his young cousin Elizabeth. Soon afterwards, he engages scientist Paul Krempe to tutor him. After 2 years of intense study, the two begin collaborating on scientific experiments. One night, after a successful experiment in which they bring a dead puppy back to life, Victor suggested he create a perfect human being from body parts. Paul assists Victor at first, but eventually withdraws, unable to tolerate the continuing scavenging of human remains, particularly after Victor's fiancée, his now grown-up cousin Elizabeth, comes to live with him. Now, the creeping terror here in the first 15 or 20 minutes, this is what does. It puts the crowd on edge. Now, Victor assembles his creation with a robber's corpse found on a gibbet, and both hands and eyes purchased from charnel house workers. For the brain, Victor seeks out an aging and distinguished professor so that the creature can have a sharp mind and accumulation of a lifetime of knowledge. He invites the professor to his house in the guise of a friendly visit, but pushes him over a stair banister and kills him, making it look like an accident. Very effective scene. After the professor is buried, he proceeds to the vault and removes his brain, sucks it right out. Paul attempts to stop him, and the brain is damaged in the ensuing scuffle. Paul also tries to persuade Elizabeth to leave the house, as he has before, but she refuses. Now, with all the parts assembled, Victor brings the creature to life. Unfortunately, the creature's damaged brain, abnormal, believes it violent and psychotic without the professor's intelligence. Victor locks up the creature, but escapes and kills an old blind man that it encounters in the woods. After Paul shoots the creature in the eye, he and Victor buried in the woods. However, after Paul leaves town, Victor digs up the creature and brings it back to life. Justine, with whom Victor has been having an affair, claims that she is pregnant by him and threatens to tell the authorities about his strange experiments if he refuses to marry her. He then has her killed by the monster, an effective way to get rid of your girlfriend, of course. Now, Paul returns to the house at Elizabeth's invitation the evening before she and Victor are to be married. Victor shows him the revived creature, and Paul threatens to report him to the authorities. The monster escapes up onto the roof, where it threatens Elizabeth. Victor arrives with a gun and accidentally shoots Elizabeth after seeing the monster grabbing her. She falls unconscious, and without any more bullets, Victor throws an oil lamp at it, causing it to fall through the roof light into a vat of acid, destroying all evidence that it existed. And again, these are very, very dramatic and effective scenes. The priest does not believe Victor's story, but Paul visits him. Victor begs Paul to testify that it was with the creature who killed Justine, but he refuses and denies all knowledge of the mad experiment. Paul joins Elizabeth, who is waiting outside, and tells her there is nothing he can do for Victor. After they leave, Victor is led away to the guillotine. Again, as we noted, Victor begs Paul to testify it was the creature who killed Justine, but he refuses and denies all knowledge of the mad experiment. Paul joins Elizabeth, who is waiting outside, and tells her there is nothing he can do for Victor. After they leave, Victor is led away to the guillotine, which leads to an open-ended possibility for a sequel. Now, producer Mac Rosenberg originally approached Michael Carassis at Hammer with a deal to produce Frankenstein the Monster. Rosenberg claims that he came up with the title from a script by Milton Subotsky. Later, both men were cut out of their profit participation, making only a $5,000 fee for bringing the production to Hammer. Rosenberg and Subotsky later established Amicus Films, Hammer's main rival in the production of horror films during the 1960s. Now, screenwriter Sangster, who adapted Shelley's novel for Hammer, never mentioned seeing Subotsky's script or being aware of Rosenberg's involvement. Sangster had worked as a production manager and said he was keenly aware of production costs and kept a budget in mind when writing the script. Sangster said that his awareness of costs influenced him not to write scenes involving the villagers storming the castle that was typically seen in the Universal horror films because literally we couldn't afford it. Sangster said in an interview with film historian Jonathan Rigby that he hadn't seen any of the Frankenstein films that Universal made. He just adapted the book the way I saw it. Now, Cushing, who was then best known for his many high-profile roles in British TV, had his first lead part in the movie with this film. Meanwhile, Lee's casting resulted largely from his height, a very statuesque 6'5", though Hammer had early considered even taller 6'7" Bernard Bresslaw for the role. Hammer refrained from duplicating aspects of Universal's 31 film, and so it was down to makeup artist Phil Leakey to design a look for the creature bearing no resemblance to the Boris Karloff, originally created by the great Jack Pierce. Now, production of The Curse of Frankenstein began with an investment of £65,000 on November 19th at Bray, 56 in Bray, with a scene showing Baron Frankenstein cutting down a highwayman from a wayside gibbet. The film opened again at the London Pavilion on May 57 with an X certificate from the Centres due to gore and creeping terror. Character actor Patrick Troughton originally had a brief role as a mortuary attendant, but his scenes were cut from the finished movie. Now, The Curse of Frankenstein again premiered in London in May 57 at the Warner Theatre in Leicester Square. It received a general release in the UK on the 20th of May, where it distributed Warner Brothers and supported by the film Women of Rome. The film was reissued in the UK in the late 60s, where it was distributed by Rank, where it was a double feature with The Mummy, which also was involved Universal. In the US, the film was released by Warner Brothers July 2057 with X the Unknown as a supporting feature. It was then reissued in the States on the 16th December 64 with a double bill with The Great Dracula by Hammer in 58. Now, the film was remastered in the open matte aspect ratio of 1:37:1 for its 2013 release on Blu-ray. The restored film includes a magnified eyeball shot missing from the US print, but not the head and the acid bat scene, which remains lost. Now, the film received a restored release from Warner Archive in 2020 in a deluxe edition that included the 3 different aspect ratios it was exhibited in, as well as special features including commentary by Steve Haberman and Konstantin Nasser. It also included the following special features: The Resurrection Men, Hammer, Frankenstein, the Rebirth of the Horror Film, Hideous Prodigy, The Curse of Frankenstein, and the English Gothic tradition, Torrents of Light, The Art of Jack Asher, Diabolus in Musica, James Bernard, The Sound of Hammer, horror original theatrical trailer. Now, the film, again, broke box office records on both sides for a British movie. It reportedly grossed more than 70 times its production cost during the original theatrical run. In UK, the film earned theatrical rentals of $1.9 million. According to Kinematograph Weekly, the film was on a Monday at the British box office within weeks in 57. According to another account, the film made £300,000 in Britain and £500,000 in Japan. Now, in the US, the outstanding box office success was a prize. In its first week at the Paramount Theater on Broadway, Variety reported Curse made $72,000 and noted it gave the Par flagship its biggest opening week on straight film policy in the last 2 years. Variety continued to be impressed with its box office numbers as it opened across the U.S. Now, in Canada, in many locations, it was not released until later because the X certificate really applied, and the Catholics were running, especially the East Coast movie approval, and it wasn't approved. Now, Variety continued to be impressed by its numbers as it opened across the states, and it made a terrific 30,900 its first week in LA with the supporting feature X the Unknown. In an era where horror films typically played for just 1 week, Curse was often held over for 2 and sometimes 3 weeks in major markets, especially in Boston. Now, when it was first released in the UK, The Curse of Frankenstein outraged many reviewers. Dilys Powell of the Sunday Times wrote that such productions left her unable to defend the cinema against a charge that it debases, while the Tribune opined that the film was depressing and degrading for anyone who loves the cinema. Now, the monthly film bulletin declared that the Frankenstein story was sacrificed by an ill-made script, poor direction and performance, and above all, a preoccupation with disgusting, not horrific shabbily. The review did praise some elements of the film, noting excellent art direction and color and the film's score. In the States, reaction was more positive, and reviewers were not repulsed by the film the way critics were in the UK. Film Bulletin deemed the film a rattling good horror show. The Frankenstein monster has been ghoulishly and somewhat gleefully resurrected by her English cousins. Harrison reports calling it well-produced but extremely gruesome, adding, the photography is very fine, and so was the acting. Now, Bowsley Crowther in the New York Times dismisses it as a routine horror picture, and oddly enough opined that everything that happens has happened the same way in previous films. This was the review that literally blew this reviewer out of the water. He was never taken seriously again in any coverage at all, and he was chastised in many books over the years for that review. Variety noted Peter Cushing gets every inch of drama from the leading role, making almost believable the ambitious urge and diabolical accomplishment. Direction and camera work are in a high order. Like I said, there's not a minute wasted here. Now, later directors such as Scorsese and Burton have paid tribute to his influence on their work. In Sleepy Hollow, Tim Burton's version is a tribute to Hammer. Contemporary reviews have been much more positive, praising the film for its dark atmosphere. Film aggregator Rotten Tomatoes reported an approval rating of 81% based on 21 reviews with a rating average of 7.2 out of 10. Now, unlike the Universal Frankenstein series in the 30s and 40s, in which the character of the monster was a recurring figure while the doctors frequently changed, it is Baron Frankenstein that is the connective character throughout the Hammer series while the monsters change. Cushing played the bear in each film except for the Horror of Frankenstein, which was a remake of the original The Curse of Frankenstein, done with a more comedic touch and featuring a young cast headed by Ralph Bates and the beautiful Veronica Carlson. Now, just a reminder, The Revenge of Frankenstein, 58, The Evil of Frankenstein, 64, Frankenstein Created a Woman, very underrated movie, 67, Frankenstein Must Be Destroyed, that's the movie, the first of the Hammer I saw, The Horror of Frankenstein without Peter Cushing, and Frankenstein and the Monster from Hell. You knew that was going to be the last one because we're running out of titles. Now, a novelization of the film was written by John Burke as part of his tome, The Hammer Horror Film Omnibus, and the film was eventually adapted as Fumetti by Warren in 66, along with Horror of Dracula. It also adapted in a 20-page comic strip, published in 2 parts in the magazine A House of Hammer. It was drawn by Alberto Cuyas from a script by Donny Evanell, based on the John Burke novelization. The cover of issue 2 featured a painting by Brian Lewis of the Baron being attacked by the creation. So, for what it is, on a scale of a 5, it's a 4.5. Obviously, there's some flaws, and some critics hated it. But this you got to understand, 1958, the rock and roll era, you're not expecting that the UK, what they call the British invasion, happened about 5-6 years later with the Beatles and everybody else. This was the first British invasion. It was the British invasion of the theaters. US didn't really give a shit about British films other than Olivier and a few others, but it opened the door for a bunch of British art films and different stuff. So it created the first technical British invasion, not of music. This was a rock and roll horror movie because kids were going to see it, parents, and it appealed to everybody. And it's a thrill a minute from start to finish. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you like what we're doing with our Hammer movies, especially the vintage ones, let us know what a like, comment, subscribe, or share.